for every dollar that someone might donate for a tree or whatnot, then there's $1 or $2 or $4 or $6 or $10 in grants that accompany that to then pay for the reforestation. So it has just gotten more and more expensive, whereas it's been $1 per tree for since the 80s. So that gives you an idea that it is very expensive to do that reforestation, and the carbon credits from biomass burial pay for it. And the carbon buyer gets this co-benefit of, oh, fantastic. Not only am I making sure that this carbon is in the ground, but I'm also financing X number of trees as a co-benefit.
Carbonsations, today's carbon industry leaders.
Are you passionate about climate action and staying on top of the latest trends in the world of carbon capture, removal, and markets? Then the Carbon Herald has you covered. Every week, we bring you the top news, breakthroughs, and insights from the world of carbon management, delivered straight to your inbox. No fluff, no jargon, just the essential info you need to stay informed. So whether you're a climate professional or just someone who cares, make sure you're subscribed. Visit carbonherald.com and sign up today for our weekly newsletter. Welcome to the Carbonsations podcast, where we speak to some of the leading figures in the emerging carbon industry. Today, we're joined by Grant Canary, CEO and founder of forest restoration company Mast Reforestation. Grant, thank you so much for being here today. Like I said earlier, we've been following Mast for a number of years now, so I'm really excited to have you on the show. Before we talk about all the great stuff Mast is currently doing, though, it would be great if you could first tell us a little more about yourself and what you used to do before founding the company.
Yeah, everything I've done has been focused on sustainability. So that's the big common thread. Vestas Wind Energy in China, Denmark, and the US. US Green Building Council, Cascadia region, before became the juggernaut that it is today. And have the distinguished title of maggot farmer. Founding a company in Bogota, Colombia. An insect protein focused on taking food waste, feeding it to insects, turning that into industrial protein, not the protein bars or anything along those lines, and using that to basically supplant the overfishing that we're doing a small fish species, fish meal, in oceans. So taking that, turning it into protein for animal feed. And it was acquired, and we built out a 60,000 square foot insect protein factory. So that's a little on the background. And
Wow. So how do you get from insect farming to reforestation?
Well, I wanted to impact the atmosphere much more directly. So I went through a number of really terrible ideas that are fun to talk about over a drink of choice. And then eventually came to I'm from Oregon originally. My family has roots within the mills. Obviously, I'm coming from the sustainability side and sort of looking at okay, well, what's the current status of various things, and then focusing specifically on reforestation. And I've been part of a very big tree planting consulting project for a big bank to reforest an area about the size of Denali National Park in Alaska, based off of 20 years of prior reforestation work in the country. And I was very curious, okay, well, how is reforestation done at home? And I was really surprised that it was incredibly manual. So looking into that, that was one of the ideas that I spent a significant amount of time on, and then decided to just commit and go full on that.
So to be clear, at the time, nobody was really doing what you set out to do, which, please correct me if I'm wrong, your reforestation approach involves drones, right?
When we got started, that's the approach that we took. And in the reforestation process, the reason for that and what caught my attention was you've got sort of 4 steps of the process. Where does the seed come from? Then how do you grow it into a seedling, either on site or in a nursery? If you're going the nursery approach, how do you get it out to the site and get it planted? And that's where the labor comes in. And then lastly, it's how do you pay for it all? So we started out and we're like, well, there's a big mature timber industry, nonprofits that are operating vast areas for conservation, tribal nations that are managing their lands. So as three people getting started in Techstars, and the proverbial sort of like PowerPoint and some prototypes, it was like, well, let's focus on the labor side of things, because we've got people running up and down mountains, planting trees, drones fly. Can we do that more efficiently? What we learned over time was that due to climate change, due to the high severity fires that are increasing in size significantly, the seed supply, that first pillar, the nurseries, that second pillar where you grow the seedling, were deeply overwhelmed. So just to give you an idea of the size and scope of what's changed since the 90s, it used to be, and you can see this is a 60 Minutes interview from a former Cal Fire fire chief. It used to be that a 10,000 acre fire was a career fire, aka something a hotshot firefighter would see once in their lifetime. Obviously, with August Complex in California, you saw 1 million acres go up. Canada lost 40 million acres. The 10-year average of what we've seen burn has gone from 2.5 million acres in a 10-year span from 82 to 92 up to about 7.5 million acres today, 10-year average. And I stress the 10-year average because I'm not cherry picking, oh, there was one bad fire year. No, this is the 10-year average. We're seeing 5 million extra acres burn a year. That's about the size of the state of New Jersey. So we're seeing an extra New Jersey burn a year. And it's not a low severity fire, which is natural, which is for what forests evolved with and keeps them healthy. It's high severity. All of the trees are dead and black. The fire goes all the way up to the top, eliminates the seed source there, and it goes several inches in the soil, eliminating the seed source there. Low severity fires are much more like a creme brulee. It kind of goes across the top of the surface, and the seed sources are generally fine. So this is the big change, and that has precipitated a decrease in natural regeneration that's been pretty significant at the same time that we're losing more and more forests. So this is so you look at that and you're like, okay, well, there's not enough seed. There's not enough space to grow it. That's what led us to acquire Silvaseed, where we manage the majority of seed on behalf of communities and clients for the Western 11 states. And then acquisition of Cal Forest, where we grow the majority of California's seedlings, conifers. And so from that, we started to build out in the seedlings, and then we've transitioned on the labor side to focusing on what we can do today, and we no longer use drones because the seed supply is so it is in such a dire need of additional inventory, and we can get into that. But then the last piece is, how do we pay for it all? Great to have seed, great to have seedlings, need to pay for labor. But if you're not cutting the trees for board products to board feet per acre, how are you paying for it? And that's where carbon comes in. And we could talk more about that as well.
Absolutely. That is the main reason this podcast exists. But thank you for the explanation. So yeah, actually, I would really very much like to dive deeper into the carbon side of things. Short segue, maybe before we do, I know that you guys successfully raised $25 million in a Series B funding round a few weeks ago. What's the funding going to go toward?
Yeah, so we announced that. It's been a long journey, and we really wanted to put that announcement into, hey, this is where we see on the carbon financing that the market is moving. With biomass burial, first, let me just explain what it is and why it makes sense. After that high severity wildfire, we've got hundreds of trees per acre that are dead and black all the way up to the top. And our biggest cost in reforestation, which we combine it with, is what do you do with those trees? Those trees, they're basically, after a year or two, there's hundreds of Jenga towers out there waiting to fall on workers when they create just the right bump of the table, if you will, following my Jenga metaphor. and by walking around on the site. They're called widowmakers in the industry. So hazard to workers, they're fuel for future fires. And anybody can conceptualize this. First off, you're like, no, they already burned. You're like, well, what's the easiest way to start a campfire? With the old log. The old log is in the ring. Like there's hundreds of old logs in the ring, if you will, on an acre that's all just ready to go. And it has no moisture in it because it's dead. So then the other thing is when they do fall, because they become structurally unsound over time, they roll down hills, because most often they're on hills, because that's the areas that we can't convert to homes or crops or other things. Well, then they take out all the newly planted trees that just went into the site. So for all these reasons, it's like, well, regardless, you have to deal with the dead burnt trees, and it costs a lot of money to send out people with leather chaps and chainsaws to cut all these down. That is our biggest cost in other reforestation projects that we have done to date. So what we've done with biomass burial is we said, look, we can take this and we can turn this into something that the carbon buyers want. Carbon buyers want, I want a credit that I can retire same year or at least before 2030, 2035. And with reforestation, these trees are going to grow over 20 years, 60 years, 80, 100 years. That puts a lot of accounting on my books, and I've got to monitor with site visits and satellites and other things. If I want a credit, I can retire. So what we do is we take all of the carbon that the trees have captured in their trunks over decades. We excavate out about a 20-foot deep area on the site. We're looking for clay or anoxic soils that we can put them in where they'll just be inert. And we're removing that carbon from the atmospheric cycle where it would otherwise burn and go up. And in fact, that's exactly what landowners do, is they pile up all these trees, and there's not a garbage truck that's going to come pick them up. You burn them. And so this carbon would otherwise enter the atmosphere. And so we put them in the ground, we cover them back up, we monitor them with sensors for greenhouse gases to make sure they're not quote unquote composting or otherwise off-gassing, no methane being released. And those sensors have been around for decades. And that gives the carbon buyer a credit that they can retire, which is awesome because it can scale in a way that other current technologies, and I support all of the technologies and the routes, but we look at biochar, there is a challenge to scale. That we look at bio oil, direct air carbon capture, there is a challenge to price. So we've identified 2.3 million tons of dead burnt trees in just the state of Montana from fires from the last 4 years. So that's 2.3 million tons that we can ensure doesn't enter the carbon cycle, which is fantastic, and just remove it from the atmosphere. So that's really where we're headed with the biomass burial. And then for the landowner, they get what they want is they want their forest back. They want reforestation, but it costs a couple $1 million to reforest a couple thousand acres. The public has generally been taught, oh, it's about $1 per tree. Trees are so cheap, etc. Well, that's the federal government or state or nonprofit stepping in and adding for every $1 that someone might donate for a tree or whatnot, then there's $1 or $2 or $4 or $6 or $10 in grants that accompany that to then pay for the reforestation. So it has just gotten more and more expensive, whereas it's been $1 per tree for since the 80s. So that gives you an idea that it is very expensive to do that reforestation, and the carbon credits from biomass burial pay for it. And the carbon buyer gets this co-benefit of, oh, fantastic. Not only am I making sure that this carbon is in the ground, but I'm also financing X number of trees as a co-benefit, which is where we utilize Silvaseed, Cow Forest, and our team.
It sounds like a really great business model, and one that also helps climate, obviously. But can I ask for a few details as far as the technicals of the process go? Because I'm really interested. Do you chop up the trees? Because I know that sometimes biomass burial involves turning the trees into bricks, solidifying them in order for them to be buried more easily. What's your process look like?
Yeah. So I like having a protagonist in stories. So let's take a protagonist and run with it. This is our first project. that we're bringing into the market, landowner affected by fire has about 1,000 acres, and they've got a whole bunch of dead burnt trees spread out through the property. What we do with that, with those trees, we assess the high severity areas, and in this case, they looked for: can we send these to the mills? Can we turn these into firewood? Can we send it? Can we, can we send it to a BECS facility or a bioenergy facility? And the answer to all of those was no. But they had already cut and decked them, and they were planning on burning them. So what we do at site is then go around and look like, great, where is the best place to put this where we can get the soils that will keep this to be an anoxic or low or no oxygen environment. And then we take those cut logs, we use all the existing heavy equipment in the logging industry. So anyone who's looking at this from the policy side, your brain should be dinging like jobs, which is great. And we've excavated out more heavy equipment there, and put the logs in. For all the, like, they say don't read the YouTube comments and whatnot. For all the comments of like, oh man, I bet that the heavy earth equipment, etc., uses a lot of diesel, etc. We do a life cycle analysis and subtract this from the credits, and it's really minimal. Let's take that by comparison. If it went to a mill, sometimes those mills are hundreds of miles away. We got a B0 rating for this project, forward-looking rating, as we're in the process of building it now. And they looked at it and they're like, there are no mills within 100. We'll say, I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, I believe it's 150 kilometers. The amount of truck deliveries that it would take for the full size of the project was over 1,000 trucks to deliver all of the wood. Like, that's on the scale of a invasion of a small country. So as far as the amount of diesel that would take, it's incredibly high. So moving things a quarter of a mile on site is much more efficient, and it solves the immediate use of what's needed for the landowner, while doing it at the least amount of carbon, and gives both the landowner what they want for us and the carbon buyer what they want, a credit that can be retired quickly. But we do not package it in plastics or other synthetics. We do not chop it up or chip it, because that provides more surface area for bacteria, other things to break down the biomass. So leaving it whole is the way to ensure that it is has the lowest probability of degrading. And furthermore, these are burnt trees. So in many cases, they've got a charred exterior, which also helps.
Okay. And is there a way to accurately measure the amount of CO2 that's removed via biomass burial?
Yeah, you weigh it. This is old school from the timber industry. There is a hell of a lot of equipment available for and established practice, because this is what the mills do, which is utilizing the equipment on site to weigh the trees, understand the moisture content, and then run some formulas to accurately assess like how much carbon is there, based off of the weight of the material, the moisture, etc.
Okay, and how long is it estimated to stay in underground before it re-enters the carbon cycle?
The durability or permanence here is we're under Puro, so their standard is for 100 plus years. We see that the evidence is that this is 1,000 years of permanence. We expect or anticipate that that's going to be a conversation around with them. Isometric is another standard out there. They allow biomass burial companies to justify either 200 or 1,000 years. And I think to date, those have been at 1,000 year permanence. And we can look at the science. Literally in the journal Science, there is a biomass burial paper that they dug up a tree in these conditions, and then they carbon dated it to see how old it was. And it was 3,775 years old, and it only lost 5% of its biomass. So, and there are like a number of different articles along these same lines, with all kinds of different logs, as well as historical artifacts like Viking ships and other things. So I think this is pretty well established science that we're in the 1,000-year plus category, and Puro's been quite conservative, to their credit, as far as getting started on where does it land. But we think that actually supports that 1,000-year permanence in a really big way.
Since you mentioned that this approach to CDR has great potential to scale, in terms of carbon removal capacity, does Mast have like a pipeline in mind or any idea as to the amount that you could achieve in the near future?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is here where like the CEO founder inserts very large number on very short timeline. I prefer a more data-driven approach. So for that 2.3 million tons that we identified just in the state of Montana, that was done with public LiDAR data. LiDAR is light detection and ranging. It's a laser that gets shot out, and you see anywhere from, depending on the equipment, like 200 to 1,000 shots a second. And it gives you an idea of how tall the trees are when you're flying a plane or a drone or otherwise. And that gives you an indication of what's the amount of biomass. To that question earlier about like, how do you know how many tons? Well, you're taking the size of the tree and the species, the size being the height, and the species to average a breadth or the sort of diameter across the trunk. And you're determining, okay, great, this is how many tons we think are out there. So that's just a single state on that regard. Our first project here will enable us to get to 30,000 tons in several phases. From what I recently reviewed in the 2024 like removals, like top 10 list, getting into 10,000 tons would put us in the top 10 removal projects, is my recollection. And that just shows the ability to scale in year one, not in year 5, 10, 20, but in a sizable volume present year. Getting to 30,000 tons, we're taking sort of first steps with 5,000 tons in the first phase of that, and then we'll expand from there. So hopefully that gives an idea of a much more data-driven, like what do we think is approachable. But to folks out there like, hey, there's a gigaton, like absolutely.
Okay. And since we also mentioned the carbon credits, I'm also curious to know, are you working on any pre-purchase agreements, or like have you anything fixed yet as far as where and how you're going to sell the credits?
Yeah, I mean, carbon buyers, come talk to us. Yes, we have our terms in place, having conversations with different buyers, and opportunities there in a way that I think we're looking at multi-year terms because of the volume that's available, and spot purchases, but we're able to scale in size as noted, and we're able to be price competitive with biochar and far under bio oil and far under direct air carbon capture. All that is to say, though, I do want to like emphasize it's an all hands on deck. So while there is a friendly competition here on like who can capture the most amount of carbon the fastest, like welcome that. I think that's exactly what is needed. So by no means is that a slight to any of those industries, supportive of all of them.
Okay. I also wanted to look at the grander scheme of things and get your opinion on the current political situation in the United States as far as it concerns carbon removal or carbon management in general. There's definitely a lot of uncertainty right now. What's going through your mind in that respect? Are you worried the industry might take a hit at some point soon?
I was looking last night at the Climify reports. I was looking at the Puro reports, and I'm seeing I'm seeing that there's growth there. which is interesting. I saw the supercritical report a couple of weeks back saying with biochar, that they were selling through demand in 2025 and it was almost all locked up, and that 2026 was already being sold through, and that the prices were up in 2024. I think it was 18% or something. So I look at that and go, that's all really interesting data. What I have heard other people describing is green hushing, where people are making buys but they're not announcing them, and that is something that I think is probably happening. And I think it also is something where we'll start to see, especially large multinationals with footprints in Asia and Europe, I think start to look at that in a much more significant way as well. So I'm looking at that as, and I'm again just running off of the data here and what I'm seeing in the reports. So I definitely think that there is an impact, no doubt. It's like can't be ignored there, but I also think that there is good activity going on that I'm enthused by. So from that perspective, like I think sort of a mixed response. All that said, regardless of side of the aisle, everybody's genetically hardwired to appreciate and love reforestation and trees. And so, on that basis, I think that there is a lot of rural constituencies that benefit from, in a pretty significant way, from our work. And that's another co-benefit, is that back to that jobs, ding, 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 like this is the opportunity for that. And I think that comes with local community engagement, telling that story, telling how much you're spending on hotels, diners, travel, with local contractors in doing this work. And that's something that, we have numbers on, and we represent to both sides of the aisle, as far as pushing on that and saying this is needed work, this benefits your communities. And if you're not, doing it for the carbon, you're doing it for the fishing habitat, the hunting habitat, the clean water, the cool water that comes from forests, along with the hell are you going to do with all these dead, burnt trees?
Yeah,
The next lightning strike. So
I agree with you. What Mast is doing is completely apolitical. Like there's nothing anyone could possibly say against it. I wish I could say the same about some of the other carbon removal solutions out there. DAC, for example. DAC is currently highly dependent on government subsidies, and those are kind of being threatened right now. So I was thinking more like the carbon removal industry in general.
Yeah. And the question there being, what do we see from a policy perspective? I mean, I think that's where you see state versus federal as a big factor. For DAC itself, like I look at, the subsidies or the tax benefits, I think, are very beneficial for DAC. I think that should, and I think there's policy movement in this direction, that should be widened to biochar, biomass burial, enhanced rock weathering, a number of other different removal technologies in that space. So that there is, and there are bills by Bennett and Murkowski, so bipartisan there, with the CDR Act, to do just that. Where I do think there is a necessary focus on is in post-wildfire management, because the current versions of those bills do not include post-fire, unless it's within 200 feet of a structure. Well, if you got 1,000 acres, like you're not within 200 feet of a structure. So I think there is an opportunity there to really enhance and move with that legislation in a way that is a strength bedfellows of partnerships with oil companies, environmental groups, rural landholders, urban environmentalists. That I think that's what democracy looks like. Let's see if we can get that move forward further.
Do you see the carbon market acting as a beneficial tool in the future? Like, not beneficial, clearly that is what it is, but like enough to really move these technologies to a place where they can scale faster and, really bring about that meaningful change that we're all looking for.
Yes. And do I have some very strong suggestions on the diligence processes, mirroring those of Jefferies Bank and the Piro event in New York Climate Week? Yes. And folks should come out to our event, San Francisco Climate Week, scaling nature with carbon removals on Wednesday, April 23rd. We are going to have a lot more of that conversation in like, how do we scale it? And what are the changes that are needed? But I think like I'm very optimistic. Like it's got to come from either the feds or it's got to come from the voluntary market. I'm more bullish, especially in present moment, on the voluntary carbon market, setting it up and then it becoming a larger policy. But coming from the entrepreneurial side of things, I've been in carbon. My first carbon project I worked on was in 2006 to 2009 in northeast of Colombia, as I mentioned from the bio part in the beginning. And we were just headed into the fall of the we had seen the fall of the Kyoto Protocol, saw the after effects of that, saw California's market learn from that, and create a much more resilient, robust market with a pricing floor, and then saw that operate for a long period of time and continues to operate. And then we've seen Washington, where I live today, adopt that. At the same time, Canada's adopted a full market. And so I think you see these sort of like peaks and troughs and peaks and troughs. But the overall trend is that the market goes up. And I think like we are definitely in a trough and headed into a trough is what it looks like. But the data doesn't support that just yet, but that's probably trailing data. Whereas I think we're going to see an uptick that may come from either private purchases not announced, EU, Asia, stepping up. I think that's all a way that this can move, but the overall trend is upward, up into voluntary carbon markets as a necessary tool to mitigate the worst effects of climate change, and in our case, make reforestation scalable, and that's our mission.
Excellent. It's always a pleasure to be ending the podcast on an optimistic note. But before we do, Grant, I do have one last question for you, and that is regarding the company.
Ooh, teaser.
Yeah. What are Mast's plans for the foreseeable future? Do you guys have any exciting new developments lined up that you can tell us about?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we shared on the B and in our first project that we have established in Montana, we're out on site over the next month, and will be for the next couple of months, executing on. Folks can follow that journey. We have a lot of really cool media tools, whether they're 360 video views on the drive-in and just what does that 1,000+ acres look like, as well as some time-lapse plan for here's what the construction looks like, to a number of like on the people side, like who are the people going through this journey that were affected by wildfire, how are they thinking about it. So all that's coming through our socials, LinkedIn, and otherwise, and that's going to be a really fun journey to take people on. So I think that's the biggest focus that we have. And then we also have some, I'll tease like some announcements coming out about our B0 rating, and really pleased with what that's looked like. So having conversations with buyers about that today. And then the other things that are like, we're just continuing to go through the diligence processes with the various diligence parties, whether they're registries or ratings agencies or third-party consultants or marketplaces. Like, continue to expect more and more announcements on those pieces.
Wonderful. We're definitely going to be looking forward to that. Grant, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation today. It was a real pleasure to have you on the show. I really enjoyed chatting with you today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. If
you enjoyed this episode of the Carbonsations podcast and would like to hear more conversations like this, please be sure to subscribe. We really appreciate the support.